show. It's Thursday. It is cutoff day. It really is cutoff day. I know yesterday I got a little bit confused there for a minute, and then we corrected ourselves. But it's cutoff day up at the state legislature. This is the day that bills must pass from their house of origin. Policy bills doesn't apply the same way to bills that have to do with the budget, but policy bills, most of the legislation up in the House has to pass the House. In the Senate, it has to pass the Senate. If it's carryover legislation from last year and it already met one of those deadlines, well, if it's carried over this far, it would have already met one of those deadlines, and then the cutoff deadline today may not apply. But for a lot of bills, it applies, and the House is expecting to be in until midnight. The state Senate was in until 11:30 last night when the Oklahoma Education Association killed a teacher pay raise. And literally, the Oklahoma Education Association was the difference between a teacher pay raise with revenue. This was a tax increase package on the floor of the Oklahoma State Senate last night, almost passed, but the Oklahoma Education Association turned all of its guns, all of its fire on this teacher pay package, and it died. And I'm going to tell you why in just a minute, but this is important to understand what's really going on here, and that's what we do here on the Trent England Show. I did want to start off, though, with this story. Good news, poor OPEC, and OPEC getting poorer. It's good for Oklahoma. It's good for the world when you see cartels break up. Actually, that's a lot of what we've been talking about on the Trent England Show over the last few days. Is really all about cartels and what cartels will do to try to protect themselves and keep other people out and keep the revenue coming in and protect their control over all of that. Well, the OPEC cartel, speaking of another cartel here, the OPEC cartel is finally admitting the fact, something we've talked about on the Trent England Show for years, and that is that the United States is simply more agile, more innovative, more adept at using our energy resources than people in other countries can understand. Because in other countries, you know, the typical arrangement is government says, the politicians say, we own everything under the ground. And then politicians get themselves involved in running, you know, either through one or through a variety of state-run oil companies or partly state-sponsored enterprises. And so you have government control, which means politician control of the resources under the ground, the way that they're extracted. And it is, I mean, it's the Postal Service model, right? I mean, this is not the most efficient way to do things. It's inherently, it's not just that it's not good at innovating. These are anti-innovative systems, right? We talked about this with regard to Venezuela, but it's true all around the world, right? When the politicians run an oil company, the purpose of running the oil company is to keep the politicians in power, right? It's not to successfully operate as a business, right? It's not to produce oil at a good price. It's not to be efficient. It's not to be innovative, which, you know, makes you more efficient. And oftentimes those things actually decrease at least the present value of that enterprise for gaining votes, right? Yeah, because if you get more innovative, you might employ fewer people, and those are people who might not vote for you in the next election, right? This is the story in Venezuela. It's a story all around the world. OPEC is now increasing their projections of oil. They're saying that the U.S. is going to produce more oil than OPEC before had thought. This after, I mean, it has become pretty clear. Basically, OPEC's price war on the United States has failed, and now they're struggling, trying to figure out what to do. This is OPEC and Russia, by the way. We should include Russia in there. Even though they're not a member of OPEC, they are colluding with the cartel at this point, because the flip side of what I just described about how oil extraction works in those countries, and I've said this before, it's been at least months, it's a wonderful fact to just think about. In these countries, right, the price of oil, because so much of their revenue, in some countries almost all their revenue, comes from oil extraction, right? So the price of oil determines, it is the one determinant of how much revenue they have coming into their government, or if you're like Russia, it is a major determinant, right? The price of oil directly determines a lot of the government revenues in Russia. And so many of these OPEC countries are thrashing about, floundering about, trying to figure out how they're going to live in this new world that is the product of innovative Americans, and in particular, innovative, hardworking Oklahomans. Good for us, bad for OPEC. Okay, I have a new example. One of my pet peeves is, bringing it back home to Oklahoma, one of my pet peeves is all of the funding silos that we have in Oklahoma government all over the place. Every time you hear about a revolving fund, you should hear funding silo, right? Every time you hear about the Tobacco Settlement Endowment Trust, commissioners of the land office, you should think silo, silo, silo. In some cases, these things make sense, but they only make sense if they're limited, right? We want government to be limited. In government in general and government in specific instances, we want it to be limited, to have containment and to have political accountability. And many of these funding silos were set up explicitly to get around that, and that is true in public education. Unfortunately, it's true in public education. And somebody gave me another example. Let's pull up I've used the Catoosa example before. This one is still perhaps the best because it's got so many bells and whistles to this example of funding silos in Catoosa. This is a district that, they're so poor they can't go to school 5 days a week. Oh my word, the Washington Post is upset, the Economist is upset, the Huffington Post is upset, the Tulsa World and the Oklahoman are upset. They're all so upset they can't go to school 5 days a week in in Catoosa because they don't have enough money. But what are they spending money on in Catoosa? Every student, they go to school 4 days a week, but every student has a MacBook. I mean, think about that, right? I can't even afford a MacBook. I mean, really? Every student has a MacBook. What else do they have in Catoosa? Well, they've made a lot of upgrades. I mean, many of these probably important things to do: new air conditioners, new buses. A lot of good, bread and butter type basic expenses. And they also have a $1.5 million new press box on their football field, right? $1.5 million. And you know what the excuse is? The excuse we get back when we bring up examples like this, and I just had somebody telling me this on Twitter just as we were going live with the show. Well, the law says that we have to spend the money that way. And I always ask these people, well, will you help me change the law? And I got the same answer right before we went on the show that I always get. This was from the group that's Pastors for OK Kids. OK in that doesn't stand for Oklahoma. It means average, right? They're pastors for average kids. Average kids tend to do really well in average schools, but they're against, letting other kids flourish in our system. That's, I think, why they call themselves Pastors for OK Kids. Not sure why they call themselves pastors, but they were saying, no, we won't help you change the law. We won't help you break down the funding silos. And because that's what the law says. That was actually the answer that I got back. This is so absurd, so hypocritical. We waste so much money. And actually, I was recounting this on social media as well, because I thought, this feels familiar to me. This is part of why your humble host is a conservative, because I remember being a student in a middle school and they were putting in all these TVs all over the place. They were putting in all these laser disc players. They had computers that nobody ever used, and a lot of this technology, nobody ever used it. I mean, laser disc players literally sat in the closet. I mean, they were purchased, unboxed, put in closets, never used, and they were very expensive. I knew how expensive they were because the only other person I knew, in addition to my public school district, that owned a Laserdisc player was my uncle, who was a trial attorney, right? So, I mean, those are the only two people I ever knew who owned these Laserdisc players and if you're a millennial, you got to go Google this or something. But fabulously expensive, and I was inquisitive enough to say, well, why is it, how can this be? Well, it's bond money. It's bond money. We have gone out, we have raised this money, we've given taxpayers the option. We've said, do you want us to do wonderful things for your kids? And the taxpayers say yes, and then the school officials say, well, we've got all this money, might as well waste it. And that's what they do. I mean, they waste it. $1.5 million press box, that is a waste. That is embarrassing. That's a disgrace. Shame on Catoosa. If I was a taxpayer there, I would be ashamed that I got snookered into voting for this. Why not break down the funding silos and say, look, we're allowing people to vote right now. Why don't we let people vote and use money instead of voting to borrow money and then pay it off over time? Why don't we say, look, within the limits that we have in the law right now, you'd have to change the law to do this, but within the limits that we have in the law right now, why don't we, instead of borrowing money and then paying off a bond, why don't we simply say, we're going to pay what we would pay on a bond every year, but we're going to do that to pay for school supplies, to pay for books instead of MacBooks, real books. Does anybody know about real books anymore? To pay for bonuses for teachers or just teacher salaries. Why not free up schools to do that if we're letting them tap taxpayers right now? And we know that the taxpayers are saying, well, yeah, we want to support education, but we also know when some of this money gets spent, taxpayers start scratching their heads and saying, well, you said education. This doesn't seem like education, right? I can understand buses and air conditioners. Not sure I can understand MacBooks. And a $1.5 million press box is an insult, right? Well, what's my new example? I've got to throw this out here. This is my latest example. This is a little bit old, but I just was absolutely shocked. Deer Creek High School library. Again, somebody pushed this. If you have examples like this, send them my way. I love to see these things. I love to share them with people all around the state. Frankly, it's a reminder, right? There are a lot of people in school districts that frankly really are strapped for cash. And there are a lot of teachers in districts that look around. You know, you get this in some of the urban schools in Oklahoma City. They look around and they, you know, I was in one of those schools not far from where we broadcast. I mean, they had light bulbs out. I mean, the place was, it was in need. You had some deferred maintenance issues, right? I mean, you could see real financial need in that district, and it is so important for us to remind the teachers in those schools that there are other school districts in the state that have so much money that they're wasting it. Like this Deer Creek High School library. Look, I like libraries. I like libraries because I like books, not because I like comfy chairs, not because I want to get a latte. I like those things too, but when I think of a library, I think of books. And when I think of a school library, I think of a place designed for people to read books and learn. And the story here in the Oklahoman said, hush is not a word Deer Creek High School students hear very often in their new library. Then again, the $2 million addition to the school has little in common with the traditional school library, including its name, the Deer Creek Media. So it's not a library anymore. It's a media center, just like we don't teach history. We have social studies. Social studies is an excuse not to teach history. A media center is probably an excuse not to have a real library. That's my guess here. $2 million, right? And what did they do? They actually, according to this story, it suggests they have fewer books, more chairs, and they have, can we pull up the picture of the cafe there? Let's pull up the picture of the cafe. This is from News OK. They put a cafe in their library. Like there aren't enough Starbucks within driving distance of Deer Creek. They need one inside the school library, and they cleared out a bunch of the books to do it. It's an embarrassment. It's a disgrace. It's an insult to Oklahoma taxpayers. Not so much that they did that, but that the people who want more money for teacher pay, at least on the quote-unquote, you know, pro-public school side of things, the special interest groups out there, they won't touch any of that money. They won't do a single thing to make education more efficient. They won't do a single thing to repurpose funds from lower priorities to teacher pay, right? They won't do anything. It tells us everything about where the Alicia Priests of the world are, where the Sean Himes of the world are, right? These are the leaders of the OEA and the OSSBA. I mean, the leaders of the special interest groups out there, they support inefficient schools, and they want more money for them. And I am perfectly willing to join them when it comes to teacher pay raises, but I also expect them to join us when it comes to making schools more efficient, breaking down these funding silos. And if they won't do that, well, then we know where their heart is. And the OEA revealed even more last night. We're going to get there in just a moment here on the program. Okay. First of all, I've got to do a fake strike update. The fake strike update is actually, no, let me say one other thing about breaking down the silos. There is a bill. I mentioned the commissioners of the land office. The land office, this is like TSET, only they have more money. They have $2.4 billion, but actually it's more than that for complicated reasons I'm not going to describe today. There are a group of legislators being led by Representative Tom Gann trying to break down some of the silos that contain this CLO money. So it produces revenue every year. And what some of these legislators are saying is, let's allow some of that revenue. Let's actually require some of that revenue to be spent on teacher pay stipends, bonuses, because the revenue fluctuates from year to year, so you can't make it salary, but you can make it bonuses. You could use it, make it available to school districts to increase teacher pay, and that is running into so much institutional opposition. Using money that's already there for teacher pay. That bill may not even get heard in the House today, get voted on in the House today, and move forward this legislative session. Doesn't mean, frankly, that it couldn't be part of some final budget package in May, but this is legislation that if anybody's serious about education, they should keep it moving through the process. Make this explicitly an option to help teachers out in Oklahoma. This is pretty easy stuff. Okay, so fake strike update. Just a little quick glance over at KFOR. They are starting to report now on schools that say, we're not shutting down, we're not walking out. I told you that there were going to be schools like this. A lot of them are flying under the radar, but KFOR has a story of a couple of these. I'm going to post that in our show links after the program. Okay, OEA, State Senate, last night, what happened? So the State Senate adjourned yesterday, and then they gavelled in a special session. This is a continuation of the special session that was never completely, they've never put the final cork in the second special session. So they reconvened in the special session to hear a tax increase bill that was from the House. They modified it a little bit. Basically, it would take gross production tax from 2% to 4%. It would add $1 per pack cigarette tax increase. It would add 6 cents on the tax on gas and diesel. And they took this bill in the state Senate. Republican state Senate leadership took this massive tax hike package and put it on the floor of the Senate. All the money would go to teacher pay, would go to a $5,000 teacher pay raise. And the bill was going to pass. The legislature last night, I mean, hear me now, right? The state Senate last night was going to pass a teacher pay raise, and they had the votes. It was going to happen. And what happened instead? Can we pull up the OEA's Facebook post? The Oklahoma Education Association came out all guns blazing against it, saying that it's not enough. Now this, I mean, for anybody paying attention here, I mean, this is crazy. Because look, I mean, the Oklahoma Education Association has asked for what amounts to a $1.4 billion spending increase within the next 3 years, $1.4 billion a year. That's a huge number. The thought that you're not going to get there incrementally, right? That you're not going to I mean, even if they were going to get their way, they're not going to get their way. But even if they were going to get their way, right, they're not going to get the legislature to pass everything in one bill. They can't even do that. The legislature probably can't even put all of the OEA's demands in a single piece of legislation, and if they did, it would be an Obamacare-length piece of legislation, right? It would be crazy, it would be foolish to do that. The legislature is going to have to move at these things incrementally. The state Senate last night could have passed what for the OEA. Now, granted, some members of the state Senate, some members of the legislature, some commentators and citizens might have said, that's enough, that's as far as we want to go. But the OEA could have allowed what from their point of view would have been the first increment, the first $5,000 raise, right? The first $250 million. This would have been about a $250 million tax increase, right? I mean, the OEA could have said, we think this is a good step, but it's not going to go far enough. But instead they opposed it. So what happened in the state Senate? Well, they had a lot of Republicans, not all the Republicans, they had a lot of the Republicans. And if you took all the Republicans plus the Democrats, then the bill was going to pass the state Senate. And the OEA flipped the Senate Democrats as a body, right? I mean, you think about who's calling the shots here. The Oklahoma Education Association apparently has complete control over the Oklahoma Senate Democratic Caucus, which is a very small caucus, but when you need 3/4 supermajorities because you're too scared to send anything to a vote of the people, right, then you've got to, if you're too scared to send things to a vote of the people, then you have to pass them with 3/4 supermajorities. And in that case, whether it's at the House or the Senate, you're going to need some Democrat votes to do that, right? Because there are some Republicans who believe in limited government and who campaigned with a promise to their constituents not to raise taxes and who are honest. I know that's the surprising part, but no, there are a bunch of Republicans in the Senate and the House who actually are living by what they said they were going to do, really. And so it takes Democrat votes to raise taxes without a vote of the people in the state Senate or the state House. And so it failed. This measure failed last night only because, and I've talked to people about this, only because the Oklahoma Education Association told the Oklahoma Senate Democrats, you have to vote against this. And the Democrats said, okay, whatever you say, boss. There we go. Okay, one more item. This is really interesting now. So the state Senate gavelled in this morning. They're hearing bills today. The state House is hearing bills today. As I said, it's cutoff day. The state Senate actually passed a massive tax increase today, over a $100 million tax increase. What it would do is it would eliminate our state capital gains deduction. This is a bill that says when you sell certain things, I don't like how gimmicky this is. I just think that the state should have no income tax, which means no capital gains tax. That would be a better place to be tax policy wise. But basically what the capital gains deduction says is if you sell something at a profit, you have a business, you sell it at a profit. You have a house, you sell it at a profit. Some houses are exempt, but some are not. If you do that, and it's an Oklahoma-based business or an Oklahoma-based property, and you sell it and you make a profit, we're not going to tax you on that profit. It's supposed to be an incentive for people to invest in Oklahoma. And it lets people keep their own money. This is one of the things, I get this all the time from people on the left. This is how you can tell somebody's a liberal. A liberal thinks all money ultimately belongs to government. So they'll tell you, this is horrible, this capital gains thing, this is horrible, this is just like, you know, don't talk to me about the Hollywood handout because this is the same thing. I say, no, wait. Hollywood handout is government collects a bunch of money from all of us, and then it gives $4 million to a bunch of failed filmmakers and Hollywood moguls, right? That's the Hollywood handout. They take money from one group of people, they give it to somebody else. The capital gains deduction says, oh, by the way, we're not going to take your money. It's totally a different thing. I mean, morally, it's a different thing. In terms of policy, it's a different thing. And the state Senate just this morning, actually this afternoon, 12:01, we can pull up the vote there, they passed this tax increase. Now, why did the OEA not come out against this tax increase? They came out against the one last night. The one last night was tied to teacher pay. So the Oklahoma Education Association is fine. They're not going to come out against tax increases unless those tax increases are tied to teacher pay raises. What a bizarro world position that is. Right? So the OEA is against tax increases that would go to teacher pay if it doesn't go as high as the OEA wants. If it's only an incremental step in the direction they want, the OEA is going to kill it. But if it's a tax increase to go to general revenue, the OEA is fine with it, even though it makes it harder for them to get what they want in the end. Right? I mean, this all goes to an important point, which is that the OEA is not serious. We knew that when they rolled out their demands. We knew that when they started talking about a $10,000 pay raise, when they started talking about billions of dollars in additional spending, right? I mean, those are not, even journalists in the room at that press conference were sort of asking questions like, well, nobody's even talking about tax increases and spending increases this big. Why? How do you think this is actually going to happen? And if you watch that press conference, Alicia Priest just got sort of feisty with the media and said, well, I don't have to figure that out. That's up to the legislature to figure out, but we're going to shut down all the schools in the state if they don't do it. Of course, they're not going to shut down all the schools in the state. They represent a minority of Oklahoma teachers at the Oklahoma Education Association, but that is their threat, right? They're trying to hold kids hostage, and we are finding out as time goes by how many school districts are actually going to participate. Because I'll remind you, as we close the show here, it's a fake strike because it's a management orchestrated strike, right? The school districts that are participating not because all the teachers are going to leave, they're participating because the school board, the school district at the management level is going to shut down, and even the teachers who want to go and teach won't have that opportunity to do that, right? So, I mean, that's what's actually going on here. That's why we call it a fake strike on the program. Thank you for watching the Trent England Show. You can subscribe on iTunes, find us on SoundCloud, YouTube, Facebook. We're all over the place. Find the show, comment on the show, share the program, and let me know if you have tips, news tips you want us to cover, especially if you have items of outrageous government spending that you think I should highlight on the program. Send those to me hopefully via one of the Facebook pages that we're on. That's the best way to do that. Feel free to jump into the debate on social media. We've got a good one going on our Trent England Show Facebook page right now, and always glad to hear your point of view, even if you're a superintendent. I had a superintendent ragging me earlier today, and finally apologizing for posting garbage on the Facebook page. So thank you to that superintendent for the apology. Weigh in. We're going to have a special show for you tomorrow. I'm going to be out of town, so we're going to have a recorded program, but it's going to be good. Thanks for watching.